So for the last year or year and a half, I have been very critical of the UFC. I've even made videos stating that we are in the worst time period as a UFC fan and that we are entering the dark ages in 2024. Now, I never really took the time to truly analyze why that is. Now, I had my assumptions, I had my opinions. I assumed the Apex was a big deal in that. I assumed that not having any big stars was a huge deal in that. But I never really took the time to look back and realize why was 2023? Why was 2024 not the big boom or not the big extravagant UFC that I thought it was back in 2020 and 2021. Now, there's several reasons for this. Obviously, in 2020, there was that whole time period where people were at home, not doing much, and the UFC was one of the major programs that was still running, or major sports programs that was still running. So people had a lot of time on their hands. UFC was on every single week, so why wouldn't they tune in? And what I also realized is that the UFC, just like kind of every single other sport, had guys to kind of carry the show while it was happening. So I'm going to show you this little chart. Now, this little website, I don't know, it's by Andrew Lore. He basically has the rankings from I think like 2016 up to 2022. Hasn't really updated it yet since 2024, 2025, but all I need is basically from 2020. And I want to show you guys the rankings from this period. It might be a bit small on the screen here, but I want you guys to look at the bantamweight champion, which was Henry Cejudo, the featherweight champion, Volkanovski, lightweight, Habib, welterweight, Usman, middleweight, Adesanya, light heavyweight, Jon Jones. And this was December 16th, 2019, basically a couple weeks away from 2020. And these names, specifically Volk, Habib, Usman, Adesanya, Jon Jones, even Stipe over on the very far right, these were guys who were kind of the pillars, I would say, for the next couple years. Now, not Henry Cejudo. Obviously, he retired afterwards. Obviously, same thing with Habib. But what I'm trying to get at here is that this was a period where we had guys like Volk, like Usman, like Adesanya, who were willing and were going to be active enough to carry the company for years. I mean, if we go to 2020, May 11th, a few months after that, Cejudo's still champion. Obviously, I believe Figueiredo, I think he vacated. Well, I forget what happened with. No, sorry. Cejudo retired, and then Figueiredo fought for the belt against Benavidez, I believe, and won. But Volk still champion. Usman, Adesanya. You go to 2021. This is April 12th, 2021. Aljo is now champion and bantamweight. Figueiredo is now champion at flyweight. Volk still champion. Usman still champion. Obviously, Habib retired. Adesanya still champion. Okay. We go to December 6th, 2022. Or should we go back one more? March 29th, 2022. Sorry. Champion, Figueiredo, Volk, Usman, Adesanya. So it seemed like for these past couple years through 2020, through 2022, we had guys like Volk, Usman, Adesanya, who could carry the load through that whole era and keep the UFC interesting. And now I want you to ask yourself, why is this such a big deal? And what I came to was the fact that the UFC and pretty much every single other main sport, they need to have a person that can be their GOAT once the main GOAT retires. So, like in the NFL, once Tom Brady retired, who was the next guy up? It was Patrick Mahomes. He was kind of already there while Tom Brady was there. But once Tom Brady was gone, it was going to be kind of a good narrative for the NFL to just put all of their chips into Patrick Mahomes. And it's the same thing with the NBA. Once LeBron retires, who's the next guy up? I mean, you have several names. I don't watch too much NBA, but you have like Victor Wembanyama had a good rookie year last year, I believe. You have Giannis Antetokounmpo. You have maybe Jason Tatum. Like you have some guys who can eventually probably carry the load of the NBA and vie for, if not a GOAT spot, to be one of the top 5 of all time in European soccer or European football, to be, nicer about the term. Now, again, I don't really watch much or at all of any European soccer, but, Messi and obviously Ronaldo are one of the most renowned football players, pretty much known to be one of the best of all time. Messi's kind of on the way out. He's in America right now, and Ronaldo's all the way in Saudi Arabia, not in the Premier League, not into one of the big leagues in Europe. But I believe that the names that people probably would go towards would be like Mbappe, would be like Holland, maybe some other guys. Is it Bellingham? Maybe Vinicius Jr. Again, I don't watch much, so I might be butchering their names, but like there are guys that the overall narrative can shift to them once the big names kind of go away, or once the top tier best of all time names go away. And when it comes to the UFC, we don't have that. We haven't had that for the past 2 years, because obviously Adesanya was losing to Poatan, Volkanovski was losing to Islam, Edwards had kid KO'd Usman out cold. So it seems like this UFC hasn't found their next GOAT. And I kind of wonder, why isn't that the same as some of these other sports like NFL, the NBA, even like European Soccer Premier League, stuff like that? Why isn't it like that? And what I came to was Jon Jones ruined a lot. It's two things that I came to, but one of them is Jon Jones ruined a lot. I mean, him being out for 2 years, not fighting Francis Ngannou, made things quite horrible for the UFC to develop a narrative that wasn't centered around him. They couldn't do Jon Jones anymore because he wasn't fighting. And obviously, Adesanya, Volk, Usman had a long way to go to reach to a GSP for Usman, to reach for a Jose Aldo for Volk, to reach to a Anderson Silva for Adesanya. Those guys had some work to do during those years. And with Jon Jones out, there just wasn't really much the UFC could do to really push that narrative of he's our GOAT. The next guy up is one of these three guys. Now, that was just one of the reasonings. The other reason that I have is that the UFC, just the format of it, just the format, the way the UFC is, it's hard to really ever come back from losing a championship or just losing a fight in general, right? When Patrick Mahomes loses a playoff game and doesn't go to the Super Bowl, he has next year. He can just try again next year. The team can rebuild around him, and he can try again next year. Same thing in the NBA. If LeBron loses 1 year, he can come back next year, join a different team, get on a better roster, and try again for that championship the next year. In the UFC, if you get KO'd out cold in the second round by Ilia Topuria, you're probably not getting the belt again. Like, you're probably not coming back. If you're getting dismantled by Sean Strickland in a 5-round fight, you're probably not going to get the belt again. It's hard to come back and say, oh, I'm going to try again next year as a UFC fighter. So it makes it very tough. And that's especially exaggerated when it's only just you. It's not a team sport. Like, it's fighter on fighter. It's one-on-one. It's not you and a couple other guys versus another guy and a couple other guys. It's simply just on you. It's your skill level. It's how good you are. And that can really come back to bite a lot of people. Sometimes in the NFL, it's a team sport. You have people who can help you out if there is a weakness somewhere. But in the UFC, if you have a weakness, that's pretty much just on you. And hopefully the other guy you're fighting doesn't expose that. So it's tough to come back. It's just really tough to come back from a loss as a champion in the UFC. We've seen several times guys who were former champions try to make a run back. I mean, we had Holloway 1 year. Holloway would fight Volk, lose, run the gauntlet at featherweight, come back, fight Volk, lose. Whitaker the same way. He would lose to Adesanya, run the gauntlet, come back, fight Adesanya. Arguably won that rematch, but still lost. Whatever, bad scorecard. And then he went on to pretty much lose to DDP and lose to Chimaev afterwards. It's just super tough to make any sort of comeback in the UFC. And so that's why I think that 2023 and 2024 were just really big transitional periods. That's why I was so down on those years and why it's such a terrible year, because we are transitioning from the Jon Jones, from the Volkanovskis, from the Kamaru Usmans, from the Adesanyas to something bigger. Because 2023 and 2024 was just the years of the UFC trying to hold on to what they had left of Kamaru Usman and what they had left of Adesanya and Volkanovski. Now, there's pretty much not much left you can hold on to. Maybe you can somewhat hold on to Volkanovski versus Topuria again, but I think at this point the UFC might want to, transition their thinking towards making Topuria maybe one of their next GOATs or one of their guys who can be their next huge stars in the UFC. And you know what? I've been very pessimistic about the UFC these past couple years. I won't lie to you. I've been very negative towards the UFC. Love the sport though, but it has been taking a lot out of me. But I think 2025 will be the year of establishing some champions. I think we're going to have a good 2025. I think DDP, I think if he beats Strickland, he'll be in the conversation. He'll be moving himself up the totem pole for the UFC to get behind. I think once Jon Jones retires or relinquishes a heavyweight belt, I think Tom Aspinall will be a guy that we can get behind. I think Topuria, if he can be more active, will be a guy that we can get behind. I think Islam, if he can stay active, which I don't think will be his fault. I think that it's tough right now for lightweight. There's not many contenders besides Sarukian, and he just put out with injury. But I think if Islam can stay somewhat active, he will be a guy that we can get behind. And I think 2025 will be the year where we finally move out of this transitional period and we get back into the having, a big three, big four, having some guys who can contend for the GOATs of their division and possibly the GOAT of the sport. Because let's be real here, Jon Jones has popped for roids. People like to not recognize him as their GOAT, and they move towards GSP. And I think once we can kind of get that next guy up, the UFC will be in a big boom again. Now, who could that be? I named some names for you. You can pick one out of the hat and choose which one you believe or want to believe in the most. Me personally, I think Topuria has the biggest chance because he has one punch KO power and he's very confident and cocky, and that can take him a long way. But overall, once Jon Jones is gone, it's time for these next guys in the UFC to build themselves up and to become the next thing, the next pillar of the UFC for the 2025, 2026, 2027. And then this probably will be a rinse and repeat. If I could go back and farther in history, this has probably happened before. I don't necessarily remember, but there's times where these guys like GSP had to move out. Like, he retired as well. There's times where guys like Anderson Silva went on that huge decline. There's just times where these guys are old and it's out with the old and in with the new. And I think, again, for like the third, fourth time, I think that 2023 and 2024 was kind of the transition period of getting these new guys kind of up, getting their names recognized, and kind of shimmying them, pushing them out the door, right? Like, if I had to make an analogy for this, I think that Kamaru Usman, Adesanya, Volk were kind of the kids who were growing up. They were turning 18, they were turning 19, 20. They're out of college now. It's time for you to find your own place. And, like Topuria and all them, were kind of pushing them to, it's time for you guys to move out. You're getting a bit too old to be champion of the sport, which might be a terrible analogy, but you get my reference. But now I think 2025 will be the establishing of a star. There will be a star. It could be Topuria. It could be even Islam. It could be DDP. It could even be Strickland. I don't know. But we will find a star this year that we can establish as the guy to carry the UFC. Maybe it still can be Alex Pereira. He's 37, going to be 38 soon. I don't think he'll be champion for too much longer. Maybe he does beat Ankalaev, but after that, I don't know what he does. But he might lose to Ankalaev as well. So anyways, I think 2025 will be the year that we finally get established champions who will have somewhat long reigns. And I think that we will find that one guy who we can claim as the pinnacle of the sport, probably Topuria, probably Islam. I think one of those guys works. Because one last thing that I wanted to show you, nothing too crazy, but it is the current rankings right now, the current athlete rankings. And I want you to look at these guys who we're in the UFC for quite a while here, right? So I want you guys to look at maybe a Henry Cejudo, who's now ranked number 7 at bantamweight. Look at where Holloway is. He is, for some reason, he's ranked lower than Gaethje at lightweight. It doesn't make much sense to me. But a lot of these old names, like Cejudo, like a Figueiredo, like a Rob Font, like a Jakedzi, like an Barboza, a lot of these guys have been moving out of the UFC, like moving out of the top tier echelon of the UFC. Wonder Boy, Colby Covington, Gilbert Burns, like those guys were the top 3 at one point at welterweights. Oliveira, Gaethje, Poirier, Chandler, even Dariush for some extent, Moicano. Let's go over here. Vittori, Cannonier, Paulo Costa. A lot of these guys have been just falling out of the top tier of the UFC, man. Like, this sport has been moving on to something else. We've been moving on to new guys and something different. And again, it's about establishing those guys as the next big thing. And the older guys, it's time for them to move. So I think the reason why, again, 2023, 2024 was such a bad time for me personally was because there was nobody I could really get behind too significantly. Jon Jones was out. Adesanya was annoying. Usman was not as annoying as Adesanya, but I didn't like Usman that much because, again, he was, kind of annoying. And Volkanovski, let's be real here, he never got his love up until he fought Islam for the first time. Nobody gave a shit about Volkanovski until he fought Islam for the first time. That dude became a star in Australia when he pretty much lost to Islam, very close decision, but he lost to Islam, I think, quite fairly, quite clearly, and nobody gave a shit about him up until that fight. So it was tough these past couple years, but I have faith in 2025 that it will be a decent year. So with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, if you disagree at all, leave a comment down below. But I'm out of here, guys. Like, subscribe, bell icon for notifications. Fuck, I stuttered. But I'm out of here. Peace.